Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and if you check out the link in the description, you'll see a link to a book that I wrote recently called Even Happens While We Sleep. This is the beginning of a series of books that is set in modern times, and it's not exactly science fiction in that it's set in the near past with slightly accelerated technologies, but it's an exploration into why issues like data privacy are important and why thinking about these issues ahead of time before new technology rolls out is important to protect our rights when new things hit the market. So, with all of that being said, I wanted to make a video helping you be aware of all the things that are currently spying on you. And this is just a short list, but it seems appropriate to start with Ring doorbells. Ring specifically because they have just like this whole ongoing relationship with the police. Your Ring doorbell is spying on your entire neighborhood. Or maybe more concerningly, if you don't have a Ring doorbell but your neighbor does, maybe even specifically the neighbor who has a house across from you that, I don't know, maybe can see in your windows at some times, then there is the potential that the police or anyone who can gain access to that video could watch your house at all times. That's kind of disturbing in a way. But also there's probably a pretty lax... I mean, if the police can so easily get a hold of this, then you know that Amazon is keeping a copy of this, and who knows what they're doing with it. I mean, we found out... Oh man, we found out also, here's another similar story, your Tesla is also spying on you. Employees at a Tesla data center got caught watching people in their cars via the data streams that are provided through Tesla vehicles, which is really disturbing. Especially if you happen to have done anything naughty in your Tesla. There's a video of that now. And Tesla has it, probably. So, Tesla owners, good luck sleeping at night. That's kind of fucked up. But all of these are just teasers to get into the main story today. And the main story here is mostly Google, and then we'll swing back around to even more Google later. But first, I want to talk about the technology behind reCAPTCHA. You're probably familiar with reCAPTCHA, and you've probably seen it evolve with the internet. And what we know about reCAPTCHA is that it's a way of attempting to identify bot traffic. It's a traffic authenticator. That's how it's always been pitched. And for a long time, we thought that the tasks that we were asked to do, whether that be typing in a word that is obfuscated, or picking out all the traffic lights in an image, or even clicking a box, was somehow determining whether we were a bot or not. But actually, that isn't true. And that story leads me to a lawsuit against Google that claims that those services were actually training a Google AI and have been for many years. And all of that free human training comes at the cost of about more than $6 billion of unpaid labor that Google has got us to do for them training their AI. That's right. You, at some point in your life while using the internet, probably helped Google train an AI very directly. Isn't that wild? That's a whole new way to not pay your employees, right? But if reCAPTCHA was only this problem, it wouldn't be in this video, at least. It would still be an issue. It would probably be in a more labor-oriented video. No, the reason that reCAPTCHA is in this video is that none of those things actually determine if you're a bot. The way that reCAPTCHA works is by identifying you in the background. It doesn't... Before you've already done the test, it already knows the answer. It either knows exactly who, where, and everything about, like, what computer you're operating, including all sorts of data about, like, what type of programs are installed on your machine, like all sorts of information about you and the machine that you are accessing this website through. This has led to a number of security analysts and even the US government labeling the reCAPTCHA software that is on so many websites spyware. and rightfully so. Although, here's a troubling wrinkle to that. Despite the fact that the government knows this about reCAPTCHA, reCAPTCHA secures the FBI's anonymous tip page, which is kind of scary because it means that none of the tips to the FBI are actually anonymous. It gets even spookier when you start to consider who initially funded this research and company to begin with, even before it was acquired by Google. And the answer is, well, first I have to explain that the CIA has a shell company which they give money to invest in various projects, which then in turn typically supply data or resources or access to technology or things like that back to the CIA.
So, the CIA, it turns out, has an investment arm. Say more.
Yeah, this is unusual. It's not exactly breaking news that this company exists, but it's an interesting moment to be looking at it. So back in 1999, the CIA decided that they needed to get in their hands into the technology that was emerging from Silicon Valley. It was an exciting time. The internet was just booming. All these companies were developing all this cool technology, and over on the other side of the country, the CIA was watching, and so they started a venture capital firm. It's a most unusual venture capital firm. It's a nonprofit, and they are looking for companies that are making technology that can be useful to them.
Like, people are probably familiar with DARPA, at least if you've played the Metal Gear Solid series, and you understand how this is basically the research arm and organization of the Pentagon. But for the CIA, this is obfuscated more, and these deals are done a little bit more in secret than DARPA, but also not quite. But in a way that kind of obfuscates the CIA's involvement, obviously.
You can't spell CIA without AI, you write. AI figures very prominently in what In-Q-Tel is looking at.
Yes, it's actually the largest category of companies that they're investing in right now. Unlike the CIA, which has, opaque financials, In-Q-Tel is a nonprofit, so their tax returns are public, and they share quite a bit on their website about the portfolio of companies they invest in. So looking at their website, you can get a sense of some of the different applications within AI that they are looking at. They do a lot of AI infrastructure and hosting companies. So these would be companies like Databricks, where you can host these tools or train AI models. But then also a lot of companies that are involved in geospatial and remote sensing. This could be a satellite company that can identify the number of cars in a parking lot at a shopping mall or shipping containers moving into ports, for example.
So, as it turns out, reCAPTCHA was one of these programs. That's right. The CIA funded a way that has turned into a way to simultaneously spy on basically the entirety of the internet through a protocol that is added into websites to say that they're more secure. This is kind of a Patriot Act era dilemma in that we are trading a feeling of security, which does not exist, for a loss of our rights and anonymity. And it becomes even more troubling when you realize that reCAPTCHA actually isn't even good at doing what it says, and that pretty much after a new release is released, a new version of this is released, it's pretty much cracked by 90% of people operating bots fairly quickly. Like, these are pretty easy to get around in some ways. And for everybody else who isn't acting nefariously on the internet, it's a full exposure of all of your information to Google and probably the US government. But speaking about US government proxies, let me tell a quick story actually before I transition, because this is kind of a similar thing, but that hasn't directly been connected to the CIA yet. So, if you have an infrared camera, you could check this for yourself. This is a really odd quirk of, it seems, Apple devices, and it seems like there could be other devices that do similar things, but see, the scary thing to understand about infrared light is that your eye doesn't see it. So you could take a picture using an infrared flash, but you wouldn't be able to see the flash at all. It wouldn't be in the visible light spectrum for you. And as it turns out, Apple devices use their onboard cameras to pulse the red light feature, to pulse an infrared flash that results in infrared pictures being taken that map out your room. This is I believe it's called like a dot matrix. It's good for essentially using a photograph to scan a space in 3D. It's basically taking infrared 3D pictures of everything around it at all times. Now, on paper, it said that this is to help the Face ID system. And in theory, you can turn off Face ID on Apple products, and it should turn this feature off as well. The thing is, it doesn't seem to. It still does it even if you turn that feature off, according to reports. So Apple is just trying to get 3D data about everywhere that their phones are for reasons. I mean, it's not actually obviously clear why Apple would be doing this, but they do seem to be doing it. This brings me to Pokemon Go, which recently there was a piece of news that dropped talking about a geospatial prediction AI software that they've been training for years. Of all the claims in this video, the ones against Niantic are the ones that are probably the most conspiratorial and the most that are largely based on a single source at the moment. Although many parts of it are easily verifiable. The one issue that I really have with the Lunduk video is that he's really fast to make the connection between the CIA and Niantic, even though it's a little bit more disconnected. So let me explain that properly, and then I'll show you some of the more interesting clips from that video before moving on to some more analysis. But the way that this starts is that John Hank has a company called Keyhole Inc. back in the day, and this company gets investment from In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's investment firm that we've been talking about so far. That company would later go on to be bought by Google, much like reCAPTCHA, because Google has this pattern of buying projects that have been backed by the CIA for whatever reason. But it was after the purchase, and as a part of a separate company that was formed within Google, that we get Niantic Labs. Now, John Hank is still the leader of Niantic Labs, and Niantic Labs is kind of emerging from the same place that Google Earth, went, and that did have CIA funding. There are other projects that Google is in charge of that at least initially had CIA funding, and this is especially interesting in this case, and I feel like this makes a bit more of a problem in this case because all of these other In-Q-Tel investments are painfully transparent. Like, you would imagine that the CIA and the NSA and all of these companies would be more secretive about this, but apparently they aren't. And for whatever reason, they're willing to tell us about all of these other companies that you can see on screen, and yet they don't want to tell us about Niantic. Now, there are a lot of other interesting connections between In-Q-Tel and Niantic specifically, including just directors moving from the board of one company to the other. But at the same time, it is, as far as I can tell and as far as the evidence shows us, just as we know, false that the CIA at any point funded Niantic. Niantic was funded by a lot of people and they had a lot of seed money. But as far as we can tell, unless it was laundered through another source like Google, In-Q-Tel didn't invest anything in Niantic as far as public records show. However, there is all of the rest of this stuff, which is incredibly suspicious.
With all that information, they know where you are when you're playing this, where you were, what route you took between those locations, when you were at each locations and therefore your travel speed, how long it took you to get between them, what you are looking at right now, what you were looking at in the past, and what you look like during that entire process, among a ton of other bits of information. After that article came out in 2017, WikiLeaks published something called Vault 7, which was a series of documents that was purported to be a large leak of CIA-related information, and it focused heavily on electronic surveillance issues, projects, descriptions, code names of hacking projects, all sorts of stuff. And here's the crazy thing about that leak that came out of the CIA. Almost a full third, roughly 30%, of all of the code names for all of the projects in the CIA that dealt with hacking or electronic surveillance or using Android devices in weird, creepy ways, the code names were named after Pokemon. There's a man named Gilman Louie. He was the CEO of In-Q-Tel, that investment arm of the CIA. And for his work, investing in what became the Pokemon Go company, Gilman Louie received several awards, including the CIA Agency SEAL Medallion, I think he got 2 of those, the Director's Award by the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and a Director of National Intelligence Medallion.
And then Mudahar also did an interesting video looking at these claims and kind of breaking it down as well, which I also watched just because, this was kind of a single source thing. And even though I was able to look up a lot of stuff, I just wanted someone else who is a little bit more familiar in this realm to look at it before I was committed to it. And he has some interesting takeaways from it.
So look, at the end of the day, right, with all of this considered, tons of applications that are free are ultimately designed to gather information off of you and use that information for reasons that actually assist the company beneficially, right? Like financially. So when it comes to, you downloading anything free, whether it be a social media application, a game, even if it's some innocuous software where you download, it, you send it and generate memes, AI generated or enhancements or pictures or whatever, all of these software, if they are free and they're gathering data off of you, that means you are the product, and the data you generate or the data you provide is more beneficial for them to grab and maybe use for something like this, like exactly what Niantic was doing, which is building this, large spatial model that they can then sell to big companies for really important reasons. Now, obviously, I can't confirm that the CIA is really behind any of this. It's just a weird link between these organizations. But to give you an idea, if the CIA was so interested, and this is just my personal analysis, if the CIA was so interested in a 3D mapping software that, again, they could use to basically serve as aerial scanning, for organizations like this, imagine how useful a software where you can basically build a 3D map, a spatial map based on photographs, and have an AI basically realistically build a 3D environment that you could then use to, again, plan situations better, maybe place, 3D operators inside and plan those situations. Again, really awesome. Maybe people could use it as a sort of game or demonstration of how to perform an actual operation. I think that has real value to not just the Central Intelligence Agency, but plenty of intelligence agencies around the world. I think that has plenty of applications in the US military. If you don't see it, then honestly, you probably need to broaden your horizons a little bit.
But it's also worth noting that Niantic has updated the blog post that was referenced in the original Lunduk video to say that they are only scanning data when they tell you that they are, that it's an opt-in process and that it's not just taking information as you're walking around. At least not for this purpose. It does seem to be transmitting that information, but it's not necessarily going to the AI. And what is definitely apparent here, especially when you look at the connections between other In-Q-Tel-based projects like Google Earth, and also the incredible investment in imaging, mapping, and AI that's happening throughout In-Q-Tel's investments over the last couple of years, and the way that this project manages to mix all of those things. If the CIA wasn't invested in Niantic, they probably soon will be, just to get some stake in this project, if their past investments are any indication of what they will pursue in the future. For looking further into this particular story and looking further into the seed investments that were made by this same CIA-backed investment company. You can also see projects like the project that would later become Google Earth was also funded with seed funding from this CIA-backed company. And there's also a lot of other imaging products. There are a lot of products that are just trying to see what the world is like that have also been backed by this company. So it seems like the CIA is trying to make a map of like literally the entire world, including interior spaces, including the insides of buildings. Also, when you think about it, this is kind of genius because all they had to do to get more information about specific places is make rare Pokemon drop there and someone's going to go looking for it, or put a gym or a hotspot there where people will just hang out and get you video at all times of day. And the tremendous database that this creates of just citizen surveillance, unwitting citizen surveillance as a data pool is pretty ridiculous. And we've already seen that the CIA is willing to use a technology that, you know, I mean, we're probably more familiar with from being the ethical dilemma of a Batman movie, which decidedly was incredibly illegal, but our government does it anyways because they enforce the laws. They're not going to arrest themselves. Come on. What are you thinking? So Google Earth, Google Maps, things that are based on these technologies, whether it be for malicious data collection and mass surveillance, or whether they're just trying to build a map of the world with the inside of your home included, it's kind of creepy, right? I mean, in the same way, like we've also talked about these same type of privacy violations when we talk about Meta's forays into augmented reality as well. I mean, like, this seems to be the underlying truth that is pushing people into augmented and virtual reality. I mean, those technologies seem cool, but the actual way that you monetize them is by monetizing the visual data that those systems collect. AR natively has to collect this data, but VR also, to a degree, has to have a sense of spatial awareness to keep its operators safe. There's often sensors all over the outside of VR goggles, even though it doesn't seem like they should be recording the world around you. Why not? I mean, we are in the age of big data collection. Even benign services that can collect your data may be using it and doing so nefariously. I mean, everything from your Ring doorbell to the facial recognition on your phone to just the little badge on the corner of a web page. All of these things are tracking you constantly. And especially here in America, we lack the data protections that many have seen abroad. And if you're looking for solutions to this, the EU has a really good, comprehensive data protection policy. Does it necessarily go far enough? I don't think so, because there's a lot of futuristic, cutting-edge threats that we need to respond to much faster than government systems have had to run in the past. We need regulators to be a bit more proactive or be a bit more aware and informed about current threats, not old boomers who are good at getting billionaires to give them money to buy advertising time. In order to truly combat these issues, we need people who are just like fluent in these issues in places of power, because these systems are all meant to run in the background. We're not meant to notice that we are either being spied on or being used as a vehicle to spy on others. So why would your average boomer politician that barely knows how to work their own Facebook be really aware of these privacy concerns or willing to protect the American public from them? Especially when their donors probably profit very heavily from these types of corporate activities, as this This is just where the economy is at. This is what produces value. And why do people pay for this data? It's because they know that they can extract more money out of it than they put in. Whether that be through scams or targeted advertising, they know that if they know enough about you, they can take your money one way or another. It's really spooky to live in a country that has near omniscience about me and is willing to use that omniscience to scam me in ways that, thanks to AI, have become increasingly realistic. You know, how far are we from everything digital, every phone call or text message being suspect? Speaking of suspect, and also speaking of the CIA, there is one more thing to talk about, and that is China's war on data at the moment. There's a couple of things that tie together here. First, Chinese freighter ships have been dropping anchor in the middle of the ocean and then dragging those anchors through the data cables that carry the internet between different continents, especially in Europe. This has happened a couple of times with multiple data lines being severed. These cables are massive, but also, in a way, very fragile. It's fragile enough that dragging an anchor across them will sever them. This has actually happened twice in the last year, with multiple cables being severed each time. Is this some kind of weird coincidence? Or is this covert action? I mean, it's kind of a conspiracy theory at the moment because there's not a lot of evidence to it, but it is such a strange coincidence that it bears mentioning. But this also comes around the same time as data security experts warning us that China is attacking American telecommunications data centers. And literally warning us that all of our unsecured and unencrypted communications are probably now in the hands of Chinese operatives, and that we should probably be using encrypted services such as Signal to communicate with each other if we don't want our data being intercepted by Chinese hackers that are currently starting a bit of a cyber war with our systems. And it also bears pointing out that thanks to the things that we know due to whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and his reports on the PRISM project, which confirmed reports that had been in the media for years that CIA, NSA, and those sorts of agencies actually had set up whole floors within telecommunications buildings where they monitored the things directly from headquarters. Like, how much more integrated could the alphabet boys be into American telecommunications companies than having their own floor in the AT&T building? So, this actually could be a little bit of a higher level form of cyber warfare than you might imagine. As, you know, the obvious way to take this, the obvious interpretation is that they're attacking our telecommunications network. But the less obvious interpretation is that they're trying to hack our internal intelligence agencies by attacking the telecommunications buildings that they operate out of. Bet you didn't know all that. That one's actually been, well, except for the Chinese hacking angle, that's all very scary and new. But the whole thing about the NSA and the CIA operating out of these telecommunications buildings has been public knowledge for over a decade now, I believe. So, yeah, that's a lot of weird and scary and disturbing news. If you are the kind of person who thinks about this kind of stuff and you would like to see a narrative that takes these kind of issues seriously while still containing an interesting science fiction story that bends your imagination, check out It Even Happens While We Sleep. This book right now, if you get the paperback, sure, I actually get a bigger cut of the paperback. I appreciate that. If you really want to send some support, get the paperback. But I really urge you to get the hardback. I put it on discounts, only $15. And honestly, the cost of making a hardback like this is a little bit higher than a paperback naturally, so I'm not getting nearly as much of that money, but it's a great deal, and I just really love the design of this one. I gave it a different cover art. I just think it looks so cool. So check that out, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so in the description so that, you know, there's only so many channels that are willing to cover this kind of stuff. It definitely gets suppressed by YouTube. So if you're into this, be sure to like, subscribe, and definitely ring that bell so that YouTube actually shows you my content. But you also know that channels like this are pretty rare. So definitely support the channel if you want to see it continue into the future. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.